So today we're going to talk about building a distributed pizza store in .NET using serverless Dapr APIs. So it's a topic I wrote about like earlier this month. And I also have this GitHub repo that contains the solution. I'm going to do like a walkthrough of that solution. As you can see, it's in Diagrid Labs. It's called Catalyst Pizza Demo. All right. So let me first scroll down a bit so we can actually have a look. Of course, I will also run the demo. I'll run the demo locally. But this is how it will look like. We have just a couple of buttons to select some pizzas. We click the place order button, and that will actually start an application that will actually trigger a workflow. That will have like multiple steps. It will check the inventory. If the inventory is too low, it will actually order some pizzas. And once the inventory is sufficient, then it will communicate with another service to prepare the pizza. And once that service is done, that will communicate back with another service again to actually finalize this workflow. Let's first have a look at this diagram to see what kind of components are involved. Is this big enough? Let me know. Otherwise, I can zoom in one bit more. So going from left to right, I have a front end created in Vue and two serverless functions. So as soon as you click on the place order button in this Vue application, the first thing that's going to be called is this get real-time token function, and that will get a token to authenticate with Ably. And Ably is a real-time messaging service, because what we want to have like a real-time communication between our backend and our front end, because then we can see the change of the workflow happening in real time. So once we have that token, there's going to be like a WebSocket connection between this Ably app, and that's like a third-party hosted service, and our Vue application. So this is then the WebSocket connection. Then the next thing what happens is the place order serverless function will be called, and this will make an HTTP request to our one of the first .NET functions. That's the pizza order service, and that also contains a workflow, and that contains a Dapr workflow. So several steps will happen in here. I'll get to that later, but it will communicate with this other service. This is the kitchen service, and this will actually prepare the pizza, and it will also involve like storing the order. So it will make some calls to a key value store, and the way it communicates with the kitchen service is via a message broker. Now, if you're familiar with Dapr, the distributed application runtime, you know that you can use Dapr APIs to communicate with other services, and also to do state management and so on, and use bindings, and also use workflow. But if you use like open source Dapr, that means you have a Dapr sidecar running next to your application. So normally you would have your application here, and then right next to it there will be like a Dapr sidecar, and that then hosts the API. So you would be communicating with the Dapr sidecar. But with Catalyst, where we at Diagrid now are hosting that Dapr sidecar for you. So you don't have a Dapr sidecar next to your application, but we are running that Dapr sidecar for you. So you can still use the APIs that you're used to, the Dapr APIs, but we actually host them for you. So if we quickly jump to the Catalyst website, so this is the Diagrid website on the Catalyst product page. So we mentioned that Catalyst is we have unified APIs for messaging, data, and workflow powered by open source Dapr. And this middle part here is what we are offering. So you can do like request reply, so that's synchronous communication between services. You can use publish subscribe, so that's asynchronous communication. You can do workflows, and so these are the Dapr workflows. You can do key value store, and you can use bindings. And all of these APIs are actually powered by Dapr. And so if you're familiar with Dapr, or if you already have applications that use the Dapr API, you can actually switch if you want. If you don't want to host your own sidecars anymore, you can actually start using Diagrid Catalyst. And the nice thing of that Catalyst is actually using Dapr is that also the observability and security and resiliency that Dapr offers is also built into Catalyst. So that's really cool. The nice thing, or the thing that what makes Catalyst really special is you can host or run your code from anywhere, but that doesn't need to run anymore on Kubernetes or anything that supports running a Dapr sidecar, because that's what Diagrid Catalyst is offering. And you can really run your code from anywhere. It could be from like a serverless function, or it could still be from some kind of a container service that doesn't natively support Dapr. That's all possible. We just give you APIs and you communicate with Catalyst via these APIs. And you can still use the Dapr component model, or we call it connections, to connect to different kinds of message brokers or different kind of key value stores, or use different bindings. We also offer like a few managed versions within Diagrid. So Diagrid offers a message broker and a key value store, but you can definitely switch them out for any of the major cloud providers if you want. Okay, going back to the README in the GitHub repo here. So from our .NET services, we're using the Dapr APIs to communicate to our app IDs in Catalyst. So the app ID is the hosted Dapr service. And via the app ID, we are using a message broker. And in this case, we're using the managed message broker by Diagrid. And we also use the managed key value store here. And what we're storing in this key value store are the orders themselves. And also we are storing the pizza inventory. So let's have a look at the workflow now, because quite some things are happening in the workflow. So this is an overview of the workflow. So as soon as the workflow starts, we save the order in our key value store using the Dapr APIs here. So once that is stored, we do an inventory check. So that's a different part of it, but there's another activity that will use the same state store to actually check, do we have enough pizzas in our inventory? If there aren't, if there's insufficient inventory, then we call an activity to update the inventory, and this will make a service invocation call to another service. In this case, it's the same service that hosts the workflow, but to an endpoint in this same service that will restock the inventory, and then it will continue to the send order to kitchen. And this will use the Dapr sub API to communicate with that kitchen service. And as soon as this message is sent, again using the Dapr APIs, we wait for an event from this kitchen service. So the workflow will actually hold. It will not continue. But as soon as we get a message back from the kitchen service and it contains a certain value, then we actually continue with this workflow, and this workflow is done and the pizza is ready. All right, so let's do like a quick run of this demo, and then we'll dive into the code. So I am using GitHub Codespaces for this. So I'm actually running this in the browser, and you can do this as well. Let me see here. Yes. So I've spun up this GitHub Codespace just a bit earlier. So here we see all the code. I'm also using something called CodeTour. This is an extension in VS Code. And you can use CodeTour to do some kind of a guided tour through the source code. So I've got a lot of different steps here. We'll cover most of them. But for now, I quickly jumped to the end to just run our solution. And then I'll explain how everything is working. Okay, so this is our solution running sort of locally in the browser by using GitHub Codespaces. I'll quickly check if all of the services are up and running. So if I go back here now, because the left-hand side, that's actually starting all of our services. So here we see the pizza order service and the kitchen service. And I want to see, no, I need to start this again. Let's see. Okay, and now I saw some green checks. So I think everything is connected now with the Catalyst backend. So now I actually can do the demo. So let's order some pizzas. So here we go, and place the order. All right. So now we are communicating via the serverless functions through our pizza workflow. The inventory is being checked. The inventory is insufficient. So now we are making a service invocation call to another endpoint to restock. That is done. Now the order is being sent to the other service so that the kitchen can prepare it. And the kitchen already message back that our order is ready. So quite some steps happened already, and it went quite fast actually, but all is working. So that's good to see. So let's go back into the code and see how this is working. Okay, I will briefly stop this and this. Okay, so now let's do this CodeTour part. So we'll start on the front end. So what we see here is a JavaScript function called place order. So as soon as you click that green button, place order, this function is being called. So we create a client ID. It's just a UUID. We create a new order. So that's this thing here, which determines based on the button you pressed what kind of pizzas you've selected. And then we call out a start method that's located in the store. So let's briefly go there. This is the store. This is a view store. So this contains like the local state of our front end. So it contains like state, but also contains several methods. And one of these methods is this start method here. So a lot of initialization takes place here. But one of the things is that we are creating like a real-time connection. And here you see that we're using the SDK from Ably to create this real-time connection. And here you see that we're calling out to our first serverless function, the getAbly token. So let's move over to that serverless function. So that's this function, and just a couple of lines of code. Again, we're using some Ably SDK here to create a token request. And what we get back is an authentication token that our frontend then can use to initialize this WebSocket connection. So that's one serverless function. This place order is the other serverless function. And what this will do, it will communicate with our pizza service to an HTTP endpoint there. And this endpoint there will actually start a new workflow. So we read this endpoint from our environment variables, and then we make a request that contains our order. And what we get back is the instance ID of that workflow that was started. We're just doing like a console log with it. We're not doing anything here with that instance ID. So now let's move over to that .NET function that is being called. So now we are here in this backend folder here, and the backend contains like two folders. There's a kitchen service, a pizza order service. And so those are our two .NET projects here. And it also contains like a shared project that contains some enums and models. So those are shared between those two services. So let's first go to this pizza order service. And let's actually have a look at the CS project file so we know what we're dealing with here. So in this case, it's a .NET 8 solution. And here we see our dependencies. So again, this is dependency on the real-time messaging component we're using. We are using the Dapr API here because we're using the state management API. I'm using the PubSub API. So I'm using the Dapr client for that. This service also contains a Dapr workflow. So that's why we have a dependency on Dapr workflow. And the other two are like typical dependencies for your web API projects. So let's see the startup code for this service. So what you can see, we are collecting a few environment variables. In this case, a Dapr API token and gRPC and HTTP endpoint. And in this case, these are quite important because these do not point to our regular Dapr sidecar, but these are now specific for Diagrid Catalyst. At a certain moment, I make a service invocation to another service to restock the inventory, and I'm using an HTTP client for that. So I create in this case, a Dapr specific HTTP client where I specify which application ID I'm calling. So that's why I'm creating this Dapr endpoint. It's a named HTTP client, and I'm providing two headers, the Dapr app ID. So that's the target service I'm calling, and I'm providing a Dapr API token. I'm also setting the Dapr API token and gRPC endpoint and HTTP endpoint for the Dapr client itself, because I'm using constructor injection when I'm using the Dapr client. So it's been set up with all the right parameters. Another Dapr specific one is the Dapr Workflow client. So we'll see very quickly that we're using this Dapr Workflow client to schedule a new workflow and also to raise an event later on. So for this, we use the Dapr Workflow client. And well, if you've never created Dapr Workflows before, then this is good to know, because you need to register your workflows and your activities in your startup code. So you do it like this. You have this add Dapr workflow method, and then you need to register the workflow and register all your activities here. Anything else here? Well, we're also using Dapr pops up API. So that's why we're using cloud events here, because that is what Dapr is wrapping all the messages in by default in cloud events. And we do the map subscribe handler as well. Okay, so that's all the, let's say, Dapr specific code. Let's move on to the workflow controller, because this contains the methods that is called by the serverless function to actually schedule the new workflow. So that's this order received endpoint, and this will start our workflow. So here you can see that we're using the Dapr workflow client to schedule a new workflow. And when you use this method, you need to specify the name of the workflow that you're going to start. You need to specify an instance ID of this workflow. In this case, I'm reusing the order ID as the instance ID, because this will be like generated each time. And this is the payload, which is an order. So let's have a look at the workflow itself. So workflows are just like typical .NET classes, and you need to inherit from a base type that's called workflow, where you specify an input parameter and an output. And then you need to override this run async method. And again, here you can specify what kind of parameters are coming in and what kind of types are coming out. So let's go through this workflow now. So as soon as a workflow comes in, I am updating the order with the new status. And since I'm using records, which are immutable, I cannot simply do like order.status is order state received. I have to do this order with and then specify a new status. So I get like a new immutable order record here. And then the first activity that will be called, so this is the first, and actually the first step of the workflow is the notify activity. So let's briefly have a look at that. So this notify activity will be called like several times during this workflow, because this will communicate with the ABLE service, and the ABLE service will send a real-time notification towards the front end. So what's happening here, again, if you're not familiar with Dapr workflow, if you write an activity, that's also just a regular .NET class where you inherit from workflow activity. And again, you need to override this run async method. So nothing very much is happening here. There are some specific types that are being used for this real-time client. So we need to create a channel over which we want to communicate. So that's being done here. And then we publish on that channel. And in this case, we use like named messages. So in this case, the named message always start with some kind of an order status, because that makes it easy on the front end to handle these new order statuses. And this is then the payload, the notification itself. So this activity is called several times during this workflow execution. So let's go back to the workflow now. So the notify activity is now done. So that is the first image that appears on the right when you start this application. Then the second activity that happens is the save order activity. I think the intent is quite clear on that. We want to save the order in our key value store. I have created a class called state management, and that will take care of all of the state management operations. So it's basically a wrapper around some Dapr state calls. So this is this class. We're using the Dapr client for this. And as you can see, here we have some, let's say, domain-specific methods here to deal with, for instance, pizzas, and also for orders, save order async. So this is the one that's being called in this case. So here we are back in the pizza workflow. So we've saved the order. Again, we do a notification that we are now going to do an inventory check. And that is the next activity. So again, we're doing a call activity async and provide the name of the check inventory activity. So let's have a look in that activity method. So what's happening here is we find out what kind of pizza types we need to check the inventory for. So that's what we do here. Here and there, I've got like a thread sleep because the workflow is already quite fast, but I introduce some latency here and there. So that is more like visually pleasing, of course, in this demo. In real life, you wouldn't do this. And again, I'm using this state management class to retrieve the pizzas to see which pizzas are still in stock. And then I need to do a return, and this is either true or false. And I return which pizzas are in stock. Okay, so here we are back in the workflow after the check inventory activity. And here is the if statement. So if the inventory result is not sufficient, then we do want to restock the inventory. So again, what we first do is we do another notification, but then we call the restock inventory activity. And again, if we look at that, no, we're actually not using the state management class here. This is using our named HTTP client, as you can see here. So what we're now going to do, we're going to make a synchronous call to an endpoint, which actually lives in the same service, but it could also live in another service that will actually restock the inventory. So we're using this Dapr endpoint and making a post to inventory/restock, and that will make sure we have enough pizzas. So let's have a look at that endpoint. So that lives in our inventory controller. And this is just a very bit of a silly implementation, but I've got you have like a fixed quantity of 20 pizzas. I retrieve all of the pizza objects, and you just save it with the new quantity. And here we are using that state management class again. Okay, let's get back to the workflow. So we are now in the part that either the inventory is in stock or the inventory has been restocked. So the inventory is totally fine now. There has been another notify activity sent. And what we're going to do now is we're going to send this order to the kitchen service. So now we're going to do another way of communicating with another service. And that's been done in this send order to kitchen activity. And you're going to already see we're using a pops up here. So I'm specifying a connection name called pops up. I'm specifying a topic name called pizza orders. And again, I'm doing like a little thread sleep here to make sure we have some explicit delays here and there, so it doesn't go too fast. But here you can see we're using the regular Dapr client, and we do a publish event async where we specify the name of the pops up connection, the topic, and the payload. Okay, going back to the workflow now. So we've sent the order to the kitchen. We do a notification again to the front end. And here is the part where we're actually waiting for an external event. So as soon as we've published a message to the other service, we are instructing this workflow to wait until an event is received. That the event has a name of order prepared, and the value is a Boolean. So it's either true or false. So now let's head over to the other service. That's the kitchen service. Okay, so we're now in our kitchen service. This is the program CS file. So this is a minimum API version of it. So it doesn't use controllers. So this is the endpoint that's being called whenever a message is received on that topic. And what we do here is, again, we use the same state management class we saw earlier, and we update the pizza inventory. So we deduct it with the items that we are ordering. Again, we do a little sleep here. We update the order again with the final state, and we save the order here. And finally, we do a pops up again. So we are publishing another event to now the prepared order. So we actually use the same connection, the same PubSub connection, but now a different topic, prepared orders with this updated order. And this will be received by the pizza service again. So we're actually messaging back to the other service. So let's go there, back to the pizza order service. So this is the endpoint that is being called when messages are received on that topic. And here you can see we're using the Dapr workflow client again to raise an event. And raising an event, you always raise an event against a certain instance of a workflow. So we need to specify the instance ID, which in this case we get from the order ID because those two are equal. And you always raise a named event, in this case, order prepared. And in this case, I just set it to true. So now we go back to the pizza order workflow. So we have now received an external event. So the result is near. So this is the Boolean. In this case, it's always set to true. We are reusing the updated order. So we're actually not using the order that gets messaged back to us via PubSub, but we are reusing the order that we're using in the workflow. Updating it with the state, doing another notification. And this is then the final notification that the order is now completed. All right, let's talk a bit about the Diagrid Catalyst part now. So we've all seen the code, but how is this now working? So let's clear this. Clear this. Okay, so with Diagrid, we are using a CLI, which you can use, but you can also use the UI. So I've actually not shown you that, but I think this is a good moment to show the UI. I've got different versions. Yes, this is the right version. So okay, I'm first going to show it here, and then I'll show the CLI part because I think this order works a bit better. So like I mentioned before, all of your services where you use the Dapr API, they need to have a representation in Diagrid Catalyst, and those are your application IDs. Yeah, so both our .NET services have an app ID here in Catalyst. So there's a kitchen service app ID and a pizza order service app ID. So we are communicating with these app IDs when we use the Dapr APIs. This is what I mentioned before. So Diagrid comes with some built-in managed services to do PubSub, and also key value store. Yeah, so here's our managed PubSub, and here is our managed key value store. In order to use these managed services, you need to create connections, and you can also create other types of connections. So even if you don't use the managed services, you can still bring your own PubSub or bring your own key value store. You can indeed create connections either via the UI or the CLI. But in this case, you see that we have a connection here that is using the built-in PubSub, which is using the Diagrid PubSub. Yeah, when you're dealing with PubSub, you also need to define subscriptions. So we also have like 2 subscriptions. So we have the pizza order subscription that is scoped to the kitchen service. So the kitchen service is listening to this one. And there is another subscription called the prepared order sub, and that's scoped to the pizza order service. All right. Okay, now I'll go back to the CLI part to see how you can set up everything here, because of course you can use all of the UI elements here to create all these app IDs and all these connections and subscriptions. But I'll also show you how to do that using the CLI. All right, so as soon as you've downloaded the CLI, which actually comes pre-installed if you use this GitHub Codespace, you need to log into Diagrid. So that you can use Diagrid login. Maybe I'll zoom in. Maybe I should have done this earlier, but maybe I'll zoom in a bit more. So if you do Diagrid login, you need to enter, and then a new window will open, and here you can log in. Diagrid. All right, so that's done now. Okay. You can also like ask the Diagrid CLI, okay, who am I? So how am I now registered? Okay, so I'm now registered again for an organization, but that's totally fine. Then you can also use the CLI to actually create your projects. So you can run Diagrid project create and then specify the name. And if you want to make use of the managed pub/sub, managed key value store, and managed workflow. This is already set up, so I'm not going to do this. You can set your default project. So all of the interactions you have with the CLI are then done against a certain project. This is already set up for me as well. Then you create your app IDs, so the representation of the hosted Dapr process in Diagrid. I've also done that, so I'm not recreating that. I can actually also list them. So let's run this app ID list. Let's actually get rid of this one. So here we see the same thing as we saw in the UI. We have our kitchen service and we have our pizza order service. Again, you can use a CLI to create your subscriptions as well. So you need to specify the name of the subscription, what kind of connection it's you're using, and the name of your topic, the route that will be called, where messages are received, and if you want to scope it against certain services. Again, I'm just listing the subscriptions here that I already have. So these are here. Now, as soon as you have created all of your resources and you have all of your code here running locally, how you are making use of the of Diagrid Catalyst. So for that, there is a Diagrid dev scaffold. So as soon as you run this command, which I'm not going to do because I already have it, a file will be created, and I'll show you this file here. I actually have two versions. So this file will be created, and this will contain all of your applications. So in this case, I have two applications. I have my kitchen service and I have a pizza order service, but this contains all of the necessary info that the CLI needs to connect to the Catalyst backend. So it contains a Dapr API token. It contains all the endpoints. When you create this first, these things have been filled in. So because the Diagrid Catalyst knows about the project, it knows about the app IDs, it knows about tokens and endpoints, but some information is still then missing. You still have to provide the application point that your application is using. You still have to provide the correct working directory, and you still have to provide which commands to run. Because what will be happening, you will be using the Diagrid CLI that will use this file to run your local services and to connect with the Catalyst backend. So once you have populated this with all of the required information, and by the way, this can also include all kinds of other additional environment variables, right? So this is my key to communicate to the real-time messaging service, which I now need to rotate because this will be on YouTube soon. So this file will be used to start your services, right? So it will do .NET Run, it knows where to find everything, it knows which ports to use, and it will make a connection with Diagrid Catalyst. And that's how you're actually able to run everything locally, but still connect to the Catalyst backend, but Catalyst is still able to communicate back to your local services because we are setting up a dev tunnel using the CLI. All right. So I think for the final part, I'm just going to run the demo again, and then we'll briefly switch back to the UI to actually show what we can see in the UI regarding the API calls that we've made, and also some kind of workflow specific information there. So let's run this again. But now I think I need to switch back. Let's see. Because I need to log in again. No, it's too far back. Okay, I need to do this again. Again. Need to copy something again. Where is it? Yes. I need to do this this trick because I'm actually using the staging environment and not the production environment. So I need to log in into the staging environment again. All right. So now I'm logged in into the staging environment again. Perfect. Good. This can all go. All right. So now let's run the demo again. And then let's have a look back at the Catalyst UI. So I'm doing Diagrid dev start. So that will use that YAML file we've just seen. It will start my local applications here. So it's starting up the kitchen service, starting up the pizza service. It's already connected, so that's great. Let's also start the front end again as well. And by the way, I'm using Vercel for this, but you can also use something like Azure Static Web Apps as well, right? So as long as you have something to run your front end and also run some serverless functions. Okay, so this is our solution again, and let's make some orders. Here we go. So this will start our workflow again. It will check the inventory, and probably now the inventory is fine because it was restocked already previously. Indeed, inventory is sufficient. We are communicating with the kitchen service, and the kitchen service pops up back to the pizza service, and we're done. All right. Now let's head back to the Catalyst UI because there's some stuff that we can see here. Well, let's do this first. We have the call graph where we can have a look at our services that we're having. It's maybe a bit big. In this case, we just have two services, so it may be a bit simplistic. But what we can see here is how our service is connected into our other components. So in this case, we are connected to a pub/sub component. So we are publishing to this pub/sub component, and we are actually also subscribed to the pub/sub component. And we are interacting with this KV store because we are saving orders and the pizza types. We can also isolate on the pub/sub component itself, and then we can see that both the kitchen service and the pizza service are actually connected to the pub/sub. So what's happening in the workflow, the pizza service, we are saving some state in the KV store. Then we are going sending a message to the pub/sub, and the kitchen service is subscribed to that. Once the and also the kitchen service is updating some state in the KV store, so that's why it's connected here with this one. Once that is done, the kitchen service will pop up back, and the pizza order service is subscribed with, and it will continue and then finalize the workflow. Okay, another thing that we can have a look at is are the API logs. Always useful, right? Especially when you're like debugging or need to solve some issues. So here you can see all of the requests that are made regarding all of the Dapr APIs. So you can see, for instance, that we have like start an instance of a workflow and all the related information, but also endpoints related to pub/sub messaging as well, right? So these are the outbound requests, for instance, when communicating with the kitchen service. Raise an event that's related to workflow, and this is then the endpoint that is called again when we pops up back to the pizza order service. All right, so this is and this is across all of the applications, although you can also filter for different applications and all kinds of APIs. But we also have some information dedicated for workflows. So that is this part. And here you can see which kind of all of the workflows that have been executed and including their state. So as you can see, the top one is the most recent one, but I did some tests before. So if we open that, we can actually see the status, when it was started, completed, the instance ID, which is often very important when it comes to workflows. Also, the history of the execution. Right, so here we see that the first step was actually a notification, and then there was a save order, again a notification, an inventory check, and so on. We can also expand this information. So this is the execution started one, and we can actually see the payload as well for when this workflow was started. And one of the parts is actually when an event was faced. We also see that. So that's the order prepared event, and then we can also see actually the input of that event, because that was true. So there's quite some information that you can see. Yeah, actually all of the steps that were done in the workflow, which is pretty cool. Let me know if I'm forgetting something, Kendall, to show here. Because I think I've showed. Oh, there's still one thing I would like to show, and that's the API Explorer as well. Okay. So with the API Explorer, you can actually make your Dapr calls and interact with any connections that you have with any of the components that you have. So if I want to check what the status is of my order, I can actually use the Dapr State API. So this is what I'm using now, but I can also use any other API that is supported by Catalyst. So I'm using the State API, and I'll be using my pizza order service. So I'll be making a GET request to my managed KV store, and I will want to retrieve the information of the latest order, and then I have to go back and actually get the order ID, which is this instance ID. All right. So it's a key value pair, so I know that order dash is the prefix, and then the rest is the order ID. So what I can do now is do a send, and that will actually execute this HTTP request. So it's using the managed Dapr, so it's calling out to Catalyst. But as you can see for this part, if you're used to the Dapr State API, so we're using the State Management API, we are targeting our built-in KV store here, and this is the key that we want to retrieve the data for. So let's send this, and this is the response. So this is the final state of the order with your order ID, all of the order items, and the customer information, and the final state.
Yeah, Mark, I would love to chime in and just call out a couple things. So one of them, hi everyone, this is Kendall. I'm one of the PMs for Catalyst at Diagrid. So we're working on the API Explorer. We'll have a workflow API here so that you can test out the workflow APIs that are exposed. So that should be coming in the next week or so. And then also we've added code samples here. So basically the goal is, right, once you've set up some of your connections or you've used the managed brokers, what you could do here is essentially, select the API that you're trying to use, select the app ID, which represents the token, and then ultimately you'll not only get a curl request, but you could, potentially get the SDK or HTTP sample for that API and copy it into your code base. So this is just to kind of help make using the APIs a little bit more accessible. So definitely keep your eyes, peeled for that. The Workflow Explorer also is a brand new feature. We'd love, feedback on this. We'll continue to iterate on it. The objective here is that this should be released for you to be able to use it as of tomorrow. So yeah, would love any feedback there. And then the other thing I just really wanted to call out, right, is, and I think Mark maybe touched on this at one point, if you go to the project, Mark, if you go to the project's overview tab, so this project, if you'll look at the managed workflow column, you can see here that managed workflows are enabled. If you wanted to disable this, you can go to that sub menu on the far right and you can disable manage workflow. Basically what this means is you're not managing any of the workflow state yourself. So, obviously with Dapr, the way that this would work is you'd actually have a state store component and then you'd enable basically transactions using the actor annotation. I think it's enable actor state store is what it's called. But we basically remove that dependency altogether. So there is no, state store that you're having to manage. You're not having to garbage collect your workflow state. All of that's handled completely abstracted away from you. If you did want to use your own workflow state store, if you don't mind, Mark, if you can go to the connections tab and click create connection. So if you want to bring your own, any of the, if you click state, Any of the state stores that support transactions in Dapr that you select from here will also allow you to configure it as enable workflows, basically. So you can select enable workflow. It'll throw an error if you try to do that and you've already enabled it on another state store, because you can only have one workflow state store for the entire project. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind in terms of like some of the considerations around workflow and maybe, you know, some of the benefits of using the managed Catalyst service versus using like traditional Dapr here. So yeah, those were just a couple of things I wanted to highlight.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, and that also concludes this this demo. Let us know if there are any questions. And like I mentioned, we will definitely share both the blog post, which explains it also in a lot of detail, and also this code samples. You can run it yourself.
Yeah. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email in your inbox shortly with links to the recording and everything else that Mark just mentioned. There is still time to put your questions in. Remember, if you ask a question, I will send you pizza. Make something up. I think that'd be great. We do have a couple of questions that have already come in. Let me see. The first one is, what kind of connection types can you use with Catalyst?
Right. Yeah. So we already showed it very briefly, but these are the connection types, right? So you can use like bindings, and yeah, those are actually like the most versatile ones, because yeah, you can either trigger your application from other services or push data to other resources if you want. And so these are all of the ones that are supported now. That's already quite a lot. Then the pops up, right? So you can bring your own pops up if you want to. So you don't need to use the Diagrid managed one if you already have a pops up solution that works for you. And like again, we are supporting all of the stable ones that the Dapr supports. So they're across all of the major cloud providers or open source projects. And the other one was state. Again, here we are even offer a beta version. I didn't know that. Cloud Framework is nice. And again, different stable versions across AWS, GCP, Azure, and all kinds of open source projects.
Yeah, another good thing to call out just while we're on this page is if you look at the bottom of this section, you'll see that there's the skip to import, open source Dapr YAML. So just keep this in mind, right? If you're already a Dapr user, you have maybe several pub sub broker components. You can essentially import those instead of using this experience. We also have that in the CLI. So if you do a Diagrid Dapr import, what that's going to do is basically take your manifests and convert them into Catalyst connections. And I apologize, my cat is having a field day right now. But yes, ultimately that's, the objective is to make it easy for you to migrate into the service. And once it becomes, a connection, you'll iterate with, our own manifest. We have our own Catalyst YAML manifest along with, a CLI prompt-based experience where you can kind of get a similar experience to this walkthrough, but using the terminal.
Yep.
Your cat might have been hearing my cat because she's also going wild.
Wednesday morning over here is having fun.
Cat time. They want to be involved. And then the last question that's come in is, can connections, even for Diagrid managed services, be customized?
Yes, they can. And actually that was also used in this example. So I'm using the managed KV store, but I wanted a slightly different behavior because I have like two services. I want to share data from the same KV store. So this is the managed connection. And okay, we can even preview this as well. But we can see that, so this behavior, this key prefix name, this will enable that different services can use the same data in this shared key value store. So you can definitely like override the like default behavior of either, of course, bring your own components, but definitely also of the built-in KV store. So that's extra powerful.
Yeah, Mark, can you go to the connections tab and add a new connection to the existing PubSub broker? So if you click PubSub and then you go to Diagrid PubSub, what you'll see here is that you can actually create multiple connections to a backing pub sub broker. So what this lets you do is, like, for example, if you had the same way in Dapr, right? I can have the same backing pub sub broker, but I might have different components that call out to the same one. Here you could potentially, have two different connections that are both using the Diagrid pub sub broker, but have different consumer IDs, for example. So, you're able to do that through this experience as well. This is something that we've added relatively recently. And then basically what happens is you can delete this additional connection, but the managed one, you'll always have at least one to a Diagrid broker or to a Diagrid key value store. We'll never let you delete the managed connection without deleting the broker. And the big reason we did this is because there's obviously ramifications to deleting an actual infrastructure broker, right? So if you went in and deleted a component in Dapr, it's not actually going to delete the backing resource. So we wanted to make sure we emulated that behavior here, where you have control over kind of the metadata and how you connect, but ultimately there might be an infrastructure operator who's onboarding the infrastructure to Catalyst, and then developers may be creating connections to it, and we didn't want there to be permissions where basically if I delete a connection, it's also going to completely delete all of the data in the database or everything in the topic on the pub sub broker. So that's just gives a little bit of context as to why this model exists.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome.
Another quick call out while we're here, Zoe, just since if we wait for anything else to trickle in, y'all can see that on the bottom you have these resiliency settings that you can enable. So if you've used Dapr before, and if you hover over the info, Mark, thanks. Yeah, so if you've used Dapr before, you have the ability to create resiliency policies. We've essentially, just for the sake of like brevity in the initial product, just created a set of default resiliency policies. So inbound being, from the Dapr sidecar into your application. So this would be like if you are using a pub sub subscription, for example. So that's why in a pub sub broker, you can do inbound and outbound, because you have both subscription delivery and then you have publishing. And so we would love feedback on these too. We definitely want to refine these, but longer term will allow you to override them, because some applications should be retried, some aren't idempotent. So we want to make sure that everybody has a little bit more flexibility in terms of what kind of resiliency policies the applications use. But I did want to call out, we at least have kind of a baseline that we've established. So.
Great.
Cool.
Great. Let me see. Oh, looks like maybe one more question has come in. Yes, there was a question. Oh, Kendall, looks like you're already typing in answer.
I was just gonna say, we can answer it live, Zoe, if you want to read it out.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it looks like there's a question about any transactionality option like the resiliency one for pub sub. I'm not, honestly, when you say resiliency one for pub sub, like when I'm seeing transactions, so one, do we support like state store transactions, things like that, or like outbox? Yes. On the resiliency side, maybe I need a little bit more clarity on what you mean between transactions on the resiliency one for pub sub. I'm not 100% sure how those two things relate, but yeah, I would say like based on my understanding of the question from a transactions perspective, you can use the like state transactions API, for example. We're working on like bulk pub sub and bulk subscribe, which I know aren't exactly transactions, but are related. And then outbox, which is accomplished by using a transaction on a state store, is also supported. And then basically from a resiliency perspective, you can, that transaction can be retried if you use a state store retry policy. So I think that maybe answers the question. If not, please feel free to clarify. I would love to make sure I got what you were asking for.
Yeah, and when it comes to like messaging guarantees, then we are like exactly doing what Dapr is offering, right? So because I think Dapr with messaging guarantees, I think it's like at least once delivery.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's also what the Catalyst is offering. Yeah.
And in terms of like things on the state stores that you may be able to set, like e-tags or like you can set consistency levels, right? All of those are still available in the connections, but we still haven't exposed some of those on the managed services. So we'll be continuing to add new features and capabilities and bubble those up on the managed services themselves. But in terms of like what's supported on each of the connections, it should be pretty much parallel with Dapr components. I think there are a couple of things we may have removed that don't make sense when the sidecar is remote, right? Just from like a security perspective or an access perspective. But generally, all of those things for the most part should be available. And we've also documented in the documentation like any known limitations around connections.
Excellent. And then that question asker said thank you. So I think you got what he needed. For those of you who ask questions, be on the lookout for an email from me here shortly to the email that you used to register, so I can get you your pizza delivery of choice. Once again, thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to Marc and Kendall for your great insights. This has been an excellent webinar. There'll also be an email going out to everyone here shortly with the webinar recording, as well as any additional follow-up resources. If you don't get everything that you need, feel free to reply to that email, or you can email directly to hi@diagrid.io, and someone will answer your question as quickly as possible. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Marc. Thanks, Kendall.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.